Welcome to spring in Canada. It is April 21st and a winter wonderland has returned. What a difference from yesterday. I introduced cold hardy plants to the garden about 2 weeks ago, including varieties of kale, mustard, Cicoria catalonia, which is Italian dandelion, spinach, arugula, varieties of lettuce, peas, and radish. And they've all done really well with temperatures in the evening that ranged between 0 and 5 degrees Celsius, and they even tolerated some really warm days up to 23 degrees Celsius. We've had some bright sunny days this spring, so the soil has been relatively warm. However, the snow and cold snap tonight will be a stress test for these young plants. Let's go see how the cold hardy plants are weathering the snow. It's packing snow, so it may be a little heavy on the young plants. Let's see. Our cold hardy plants are completely covered in snow this morning. Maybe the plants would have been happier without the fleece on top last night. There's one Cicoria catalonia plant, which is Italian dandelion, that looks quite strong and perky amidst the snow. But I won't know for certain until the snow melts and we take a look at the other plants. But this is a perfect example of how gardening invites the opportunity to experiment, to learn, and, well, quite literally to grow for both the steward of the garden and, of course, the plants. I'm happy to report that the plants survived frost and snow with only a few broken stems and wilted leaves. I am yet again reassured by the resilience of these cold hardy plants. Let's go take a look. Planting before the last frost can be a little nerve-wracking, and you may be wondering, why take the chance? Losing plants is a very real possibility, but there are a few reasons why I strategically plant before the last frost. I live in Southern Ontario, and our growing season is relatively short, and my family's intention is to grow the majority of our food for the entire year, so we really need to optimize our growing season. There are cold hardy plants that absolutely thrive in cold weather, and spinach is a great example of this. If I didn't introduce spinach to the garden before the last frost, we would likely miss out on a beautiful harvest entirely. I find spinach is one of the first plants to bolt as soon as the warm weather arrives. Early spring planting really marks the beginning of succession planting for me, which helps me pace myself through the entire gardening season, but almost more importantly, it helps me manage the harvest. If the harvest bounty peaks all around the same time, I find it completely overwhelming in the kitchen, and that can lead to waste. For me, a successful gardening season is not only about working with beautiful fresh produce, but it's also having the stamina to preserve and plan for the winter pantry. If you're not familiar with succession planting, it's essentially the process of planting throughout your entire gardening season. For example, I may plant bush beans every 2 weeks, 3 or 4 times throughout the gardening season. And there are many plants that you can do this with: carrots, radish, beets, among others. I grow all of my plants from seed, so by early April, I need to be thinking about managing space in our sunroom. So by having my cold hardy plants ready to introduce outside, I then can focus on growing my heat-loving plants. Truthfully, I am an impatient and enthusiastic gardener, so the thought of having to wait until mid-May to plant in our zone would be really hard for me, and I just wouldn't want to miss out on these delicious cold hardy plants. I try to be strategic when I'm planting before the last frost and contending with unpredictable weather, and here are a few tips that have really helped me prevent losing plants. I recommend researching the varieties that are cold hardy for your zone. I'll include a list of what I experimented with this year. It's certainly not conclusive, but it may be a starting point. Monitor the 7 to 14 day weather forecast. Ideally look for a period that has a little bit of overcast with a touch of rain, some warmth, and that is absolutely free from frost. And this will allow your plants to establish their roots before they have to contend with challenging weather fronts. I planted out our cold hardy plants 2 weeks before our snowstorm, and that really gave them an opportunity to strengthen their roots before they had to deal with frost and snow. I usually hold back a few plants, and this is really a peace of mind strategy so that if I do lose plants, I have a backup plan. When I'm growing plants, I usually plan for unknown variables, so I'll plant some extras, and if everything goes well, they make for great gifts. Strong plants are important, especially this time of year with unpredictable weather, so I strive for 4 to 5 true leaves before transplanting. Just because your plants are cold hardy doesn't mean you can skip hardening them off. Take time to harden off your plants properly. I do this over 1 to 2 weeks by slowly introducing my indoor plants to the elements and also increase their exposure to direct sunlight. I have learned this the hard way. It is a valuable step. Don't skip it. If you are expecting a cold snap with frost, I would recommend considering using a row cover. In hindsight, I don't think the plants needed a row cover for this particular snowstorm. The snow was here for only a couple of days and the temperatures warmed up relatively quickly afterwards. I think the row covers contributed a little bit towards some of the stems breaking, so if I were to do it again, I would use a hoop with row cover. Since the snowstorm, I introduced a few more plants to the garden. I planted Swiss chard, beets, varieties of cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower. This year I'm experimenting to see if I can have a spring and a fall harvest for cabbage, broccoli, and cauliflower. We'll see how it goes. Every spring, when I plant before the last frost, I feel like I'm presented with a stress test of some kind for my plants, and I continue to be amazed by how resilient these cold hardy plants are. So I've decided to embrace this journey and try to be resilient myself as a steward of the garden. I'm not going to fear the frost, but rather be strategic and learn to adapt in a timely way. You do need to take the frost seriously, but I think it's worth the effort to experiment, learn, and grow so that you can enjoy a delicious, cold, hardy harvest. Happy spring gardening!